I pulled into Barstow a little after 11, drained from a long day on the road. I had been on the highway since sunrise, and by the time I saw the lights from the truck stop off Main Street, I felt that strange, shaky kind of tired that comes after hours of desert driving. Barstow was never my real destination. It was just a place to sleep, a place that kept me close enough to Vegas to finish the drive after some rest. The motel I picked was the kind of place you forget as soon as you leave it. Faded paint, a battered ice machine by the office, a row of rooms facing the parking lot, and a buzzing fluorescent sign that washed everything in a weak, pale glow. I checked into room 15 without thinking much of it. The air smelled like old carpet and cleaning spray, and when I walked around the room, I noticed the window had been left cracked open by whoever cleaned earlier. I shut it, locked it, and didn't think about it again. All I wanted was sleep. Sometime around 2:30 in the morning, a sound pulled me out of a deep, uncomfortable drowsiness. It was a slow, rhythmic noise, soft at first, like something tapping wood. When I rolled over and tried to place it, the pattern became clearer. 3 knocks. A pause. Then more knocking farther along the walkway. The room was still dark, and the red glow from the alarm clock made everything feel unreal. My first thought was that someone drunk was moving from room to room looking for a friend, or maybe a staff member doing some kind of check. But the steady rhythm didn't fit any of that. It was too controlled, too deliberate. I sat up, listening. 3 knocks. A 10-second wait. Footsteps. 3 more knocks. The sound moved in order, like someone working down a list. My room was right in the middle of the row, and the knocks were drawing closer. I felt myself wake up fully, that slow burn of adrenaline spreading through my chest. The curtains were thin, and the street lights outside made the fabric glow. I moved toward the window, keeping low, and lifted the edge of the blinds just enough to see out. A tall man in a camouflage jacket was walking along the walkway outside the rooms, stopping at each door with a strange stillness. He didn't sway or hesitate. He'd lift his hand, knock 3 times, wait exactly 10 seconds, then walk on. His head was shaved close, and the dim light reflected faintly off his scalp. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look lost. He looked like someone doing a job. I watched him knock on the room a few doors down from mine, then the next. Room 14, then 16, then 18. He was skipping the odd numbers, hitting every even number on the row. Each knock echoed slightly in the quiet night air, carrying just enough force to wake people, but not enough to sound like an emergency. I waited for him to stop at my door, but he didn't. He walked straight past it, without even glancing at the peephole. My heart lifted for a moment, as if being skipped somehow kept me safe. But when he reached the edge of my window, he paused. He stopped directly beside my room, right by the thin metal frame of the blinds I was hiding behind. He didn't look confused or lost. He didn't look like he had skipped my door by accident. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. It was worn and bent at the corners. He opened it, flipped to a page with one hand, and stared directly at my door as he started writing. I could see his breath move in the cold air. I waited for him to turn his head, to see me, to react in some way, but he stayed focused on the door as if studying it. He wrote something, paused, wrote again, closed the notebook, and kept walking. He went right back to knocking on the next even-numbered door, never looking back at mine. I didn't move for several minutes. I just watched him pass each window, each door, until he reached the far end of the building. Nothing in his movements suggested anything random. Everything about him felt planned. When someone finally reacted, a trucker in one of the rooms, he didn't flinch. The door had opened fast, letting out a rectangle of warm light. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the man tighten his shoulders and step back. The trucker pointed sharply toward the parking lot, and after a still moment, the man in the camouflage jacket turned and left. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view without rushing or looking behind him. I stayed awake long after that, listening for footsteps, engines, anything. I didn't know whether he had left on foot, in a vehicle, or if he was somewhere else on the property. The motel felt colder, like the night air had seeped into the walls. I kept the lights off, convinced that if he came back, I didn't want to draw attention. My mind went over the strange way he skipped my door, but wrote something down while staring at it. I tried to come up with explanations, maintenance checks, security rounds, someone mentally unstable, but none of them matched the notebook or the deliberate pacing. When the sky finally started turning pale, I gave up on trying to sleep. I packed my things quickly, checked the window lock again, and stepped outside. The walkway was quiet, Those scuff marks on the concrete showed where he had walked back and forth. I felt an odd unease as I passed the doors he had knocked on. They all looked normal in daylight, but it was easy to imagine him standing at each one, waiting for a reaction. When I reached the front office, I stopped by the window to drop off my key. The morning clerk was busy organizing papers on a clipboard that held the nightly check-ins. As I set the key down, the wind lifted the corner of the top sheet, revealing faint pencil marks that looked half erased. Something about the smudges caught my eye. I don't know why I leaned in, maybe because I recognized the shape of the handwriting, or maybe because the uneasiness from the night before hadn't left me. On the corner of the page, just above the printed list of room numbers, I could see it clearly. 15 Lone. Arrived 11:42 p.m. Left window open earlier. The writing was the same shade of graphite I had seen glinting in the man's notebook under the walkway light. It wasn't hotel staff handwriting. It wasn't in the margins of the official form. It had been added later, lightly, as if someone wrote it fast, and then tried to erase it without fully removing the words. My room was 15. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at that scribbled note. The clerk didn't notice. He kept flipping through papers, humming softly, doing the usual morning routine. The more I looked, the more details I recognized. The arrival time was right. I had checked in at 11:42, barely awake. My window cracked without realizing it until I closed it. The phrase "lone" stuck out the most. He had taken the time to notice that I was by myself. I didn't ask the clerk anything. I didn't point out the writing or say a word. Instead, I stepped back, nodded, and walked out to the parking lot. The air was warmer now, the sun trying to burn through the thin desert haze. Trucks idled by the gas pumps at the truck stop, and cars drifted in and out of the lot. Everything looked normal, but I felt like I was seeing it all from behind a thin layer of glass, as if the world had split into the part everyone else lived in and the narrow, darker line I had crossed during the night. Before getting into my car, I scanned the parking lot one more time. There was no sign of the man. No camouflage jacket, no shaved head, no notebook. But the walkway where he'd stood writing down details of my room was still there, empty and quiet in the morning light. As I started the engine, I found myself checking the rearview mirror again and again. I knew I would probably never know who he was or what he wanted. But I understood something with sharp clarity. He hadn't been knocking to find someone. He had been collecting information, observing, recording, picking specific rooms, skipping others, and for whatever reason, he had placed mine on his list. When I pulled out onto Main Street and merged toward the highway, the relief I expected didn't come. The desert stretched out ahead, and Vegas wasn't far, but the feeling stayed with me. The sense that someone had stood inches from my door, studying it in silence, deciding what to do with what he'd learned. And the thought I couldn't shake, even miles later, was simple and cold. He hadn't needed to knock on my door. He had already been close enough earlier, when the window was cracked open, to see everything he wanted. I had been driving for 12 hours straight, the kind of drive where every mile blurs together in a haze of asphalt and headlights. By the time I pulled into the small motel just outside Chattanooga, the sun had begun its slow climb, painting the sky a pale, washed-out blue. I parked in a space near the office, noticing the faded paint on the building, the sagging sign that read the motel's name in letters half peeling from years of sun and weather. It looked tired, like it had been standing in the same spot for decades, quietly fading into the background of a strip of road that travelers only noticed when they needed it. The lot was almost empty, except for a rusty pickup in the corner and one newer car near the far end. The air smelled faintly of gasoline, damp asphalt, and something faintly metallic, something I couldn't place. Inside the office, the manager was polite but distracted, his attention flitting between the register and a small TV mounted in the corner that displayed the parking lot outside. I handed him my license and credit card. He gave me a key with a small handwritten number, and I walked out to my room, my suitcase scraping against the rough concrete. The hallway smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old smoke, and I noticed a faint sticky patch near the baseboard, where someone had probably spilled something months ago. My room was small but clean, the kind of motel room you expect after a long drive. A bed with thin but neat sheets, a small desk with a chair tucked under it, a TV on a stand, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I didn't bother unpacking. I fell face first into the bed and slept almost instantly. I woke later, though I didn't know how long I had been asleep. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the building settling. Then, at exactly 7:03 a.m., there was a knock at the door. It was sharp and deliberate, and a woman's voice called through it, soft but insistent, saying, "Housekeeping." My first thought was annoyance. I had no plans to be awake that early, and the sudden sound startled me. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fog of sleep, and slowly got up to answer. When I opened the door, a middle-aged woman stood there, smiling in a way that seemed both practiced and casual. She wore a faded blue uniform, the kind you imagine someone would wear at a place like this, the kind that had clearly been washed too many times. She carried nothing with her, no cart, no cleaning supplies, not even a clipboard. Her presence was almost too calm, too assured. "You're up early, Daniel," she said. I froze immediately. Daniel was my name, yes, but I hadn't given it to anyone at the desk. The paperwork was tucked inside the office, not visible from outside. How could she possibly know it? I tried to speak, to ask, but my voice stuck somewhere behind the lump in my throat. Before I could recover, she smiled again, nodded as if she expected me to be reassured, and walked away. She didn't clean anything, didn't pause to knock on any other door or check the hallway. She simply left, melting into the hall like she belonged there, but also didn't. I closed the door, my heart still racing, staring at the hallway as if I could see her turn a corner and vanish. The incident lingered with me all day. Every mundane thing felt tinged with a strange unease. I showered, ate, and drove into town for coffee, trying to dismiss the experience. But when I returned, I decided to ask about it at the office. The manager listened carefully, leaning back in his chair, and then told me something that made my stomach drop. Housekeeping didn't start until 10, and only 2 male staff members were scheduled that day. He even showed me the schedule, proof that no woman was officially on duty. There was no way anyone could have had a key to the closet at that hour. No one matched the description I had given. He seemed concerned but also hesitant, like he wasn't sure how to frame what I had experienced without sounding ridiculous. That night, I tried to focus on normal routines, but the unease from the morning stayed with me. I turned on the TV to watch the news, trying to distract myself. I noticed that every so often the channel would flicker, switching to the feed from the security cameras in the hallway. At first, I thought it was a glitch, the TV misbehaving, but the pattern was consistent. Each time, the image showed an empty hallway, the dim fluorescent lights reflecting off the slightly scuffed floor tiles. The cameras were live feeds, so I could tell there was no delay. I watched for a while, telling myself that maybe it was the remote, maybe a malfunction. Then, at exactly 12:47 a.m., the screen shifted again, and I caught movement. A figure walking slowly down the hallway. The uniform was unmistakable, the same faded blue. The person didn't look up at the camera, didn't notice anything, simply moved past the frame and disappeared around the corner. My stomach tightened. I rewound the footage on the small TV, watched it over and over. Each time, the person was gone in an instant, leaving the hallway empty and silent. I didn't sleep well after that. The room felt smaller, the sounds of the air conditioner louder than they should have been, the faint creak of the building turning into deliberate, almost intentional groans. I kept imagining her standing just outside my door, smiling that calm, knowing smile. I checked the lock on my door several times, tested the chain, made sure the deadbolt was engaged. Every time I looked out the window, the parking lot was empty, the morning glow soft and indifferent. I even considered leaving, packing up and finding another motel farther down the road, but I told myself it had to be a mistake, some coincidence. Maybe a past guest had left the door unlocked, maybe someone had just walked by, and my mind had connected the details in a way that felt personal. But nothing explained the name, nothing explained the camera footage. The next morning, I left early, not wanting to wait around for more coincidences. The manager looked surprised when I checked out, and I didn't mention the footage or the morning visit, just thanked him for the room and kept my head down. Driving away, I kept the image of the hallway on my mind, the figure moving with quiet certainty. It didn't make sense, and yet it had. I thought about it over and over during the drive, how someone could know my name, be in the hallway at night, and leave without ever interacting with anyone. It felt deliberate, like a message or a test, even though I couldn't understand the intent. Weeks later, I told a friend about it, describing the motel, the manager, and the mysterious woman. He laughed at first, but when I explained that no one on staff fit the description, that housekeeping didn't even start until 10, he went quiet. "That's weird," he said finally. And it was. Still, the rational side of me clung to possibilities. a mix-up in scheduling, a past employee somehow entering, a guest in costume. I never returned to that motel, and I never saw anything like it again. But I carry the memory clearly, the image of that hallway, the calm confidence of a woman who shouldn't have been there, and the way my name left her lips like a private secret she shouldn't have known. It was unnerving in a way I can't fully explain. A perfectly ordinary moment turned strange, lingering in my memory because of its quiet impossibility, the way reality had been around me for just a moment, leaving no explanation except the certainty that I had been seen, noticed, and named. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't dramatic in the way a story demands. It was ordinary, but precise in a way that made it impossible to dismiss. That small motel, the faded blue uniform, the empty hallway on the security feed, and the early morning knock, all of it became a single, clear memory. I left with nothing tangible, no evidence, no follow-up, just the certainty that someone or something had been in that hallway, and for reasons I couldn't understand, had made sure I knew I had been seen. It was unnerving, quiet, and completely real. It stayed with me in a way that nothing else from that trip did. A reminder that sometimes the world can feel intimate in ways that are not comforting, and that ordinary spaces can hide small, inexplicable truths that only one person ever notices. I never went back, but I sometimes drive past the stretch of road, my eyes flicking to the old sign, wondering if anyone else ever noticed the blue uniform in the empty hallways. I was driving from Memphis to Baton Rouge after a long day of meetings and deadlines that had piled up into one of those weeks where you barely remember what day it is. The drive had been uneventful for the most part, mostly highway, streetlights fading into darkness, occasional trucks roaring past in the other lane. By the time I hit Jackson, Mississippi, around 11 at night, I realized I was too tired to keep going safely. My eyes were burning from staring at the road, my neck stiff from sitting too long, and my stomach a little off from the fast food I'd grabbed at a rest stop. I pulled off I-55 at the next exit and spotted a cheap motel with a blinking neon sign. It didn't look like much, but it promised a bed and a shower, and that was enough for me. The parking lot was half empty, the asphalt cracked and uneven, with a few oil stains catching the glow from the street lamps. The exterior walls were faded pastel, probably once bright blue or green, but now dull and peeling. The fluorescent light above the office flickered lazily, buzzing in a low, irregular rhythm. I parked near the front, turned off the engine, and sat for a few moments just staring at the building, listening to the night sounds, distant tires on the highway, the occasional hum of an air conditioning unit, a dog barking somewhere far off. Inside, the office smelled of disinfectant, strong and sharp, like bleach mixed with the faint chemical tang of an old carpet. The clerk was an older man, maybe in his 60s, thinning hair and a worn baseball cap pulled low. He moved slowly, handed me the key with a small nod, and I went back to my car to unload my bag. The room was on the ground floor, room 15, at the far end of the hall. The carpet in the hallway was threadbare and had dark stains along the edges. The walls were a dull beige, and a single flickering ceiling light cast uneven shadows that seemed to stretch and compress as I walked. I carried my bag in, unlocked the door, and stepped into the room. The air inside smelled faintly of bleach, like the lobby but weaker, mixed with the underlying mustiness that comes from a place that has seen decades of transient visitors. The bedspread was plain, a muted brown but clean enough. The sheets were crisp, no visible stains, the pillowcases fluffed and even. The bathroom looked like it had been scrubbed earlier that day. Everything was in place. The small shampoo bottles lined up neatly, the towels folded squarely, the toilet flush working properly. I set my bag down on the edge of the bed and turned on the small lamp by the nightstand. The light was soft, yellow, comforting after the harsh fluorescent of the hall. I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tension from hours of driving. The bathroom mirror was slightly fogged when I finished, and for a moment, the room felt like a tiny island of normalcy in the middle of a long, exhausting day. By the time I lay down, it was close to midnight. I felt my body relax instantly against the mattress, my eyes heavy. Outside, the occasional car passed, the sound muffled through the thin walls. I drifted into sleep, the kind where the body sinks into the bed while the mind starts to unravel and dissolve. I woke suddenly at 3:18 a.m. The room was dark, the lamp off, but the faint glow from the streetlights outside the window painted stripes across the floor. At first, I thought the sound was outside, maybe someone whispering to themselves in the parking lot, but then it became clear that it was coming from below the bed, the low, vibrating whisper of voices just beneath me. I froze, my body stiff, heart hammering against my ribs, and leaned over the edge to see if anyone was there. The sound stopped instantly. Silence pressed against me, thick and heavy. Then the voice came again, soft, hoarse, deliberate. "Don't look." My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. My hands felt cold, clammy against the sheets, and I realized my mind was already sprinting through every possible explanation. Someone hiding under the bed, a prankster, a squatter who had somehow gotten in through a service entrance. But nothing seemed to make sense. The bed was low to the floor, the box spring solid, the floorboards beneath creaking normally under my own weight. After a full minute of frozen stillness, the voice whispered again, chillingly calm. "He'll come back." It wasn't a scream, not a shout, not even a threat, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Every muscle in my body tightened. My bag was right by the bed, my keys, my wallet. I grabbed them in a single motion, not stopping to think, and I practically dove for the door. My heart was a drum in my chest, every beat loud and insistent. The hallway outside smelled faintly of the same bleach and mustiness, but the fluorescent light flickered more aggressively, making the shadows jump and stretch. My shoes were half on, half off, but I didn't care. I ran to the office, threw the door open, and told the clerk there was someone in my room. He didn't seem surprised, just sighed and grabbed a flashlight, following me without a word. The beam cut across the carpet as he got down on his knees, and we looked under the bed. "See? Nothing," he said, but his eyes lingered too long on a corner of the floor. The wood there was warped, a slight gap showing where the floorboards had been pried up before. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it gave the space beneath the bed a strange unevenness, like someone had used it recently. He stood, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, and muttered that maybe it was better to stay somewhere else tonight. I didn't argue. I grabbed my things, loaded them back into the car, and left the motel without looking back. On the road, the night felt sharper, colder. I passed the blinking neon sign of the motel, watched it recede in the rearview mirror, and felt an odd mixture of relief and lingering tension, as if the night itself had left a residue on my skin. The next motel I stopped at was cleaner, newer, with a small courtyard and a security camera at the entrance. I checked in quietly, made sure the door locked securely behind me, and lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner. No whispering, no movement, just the low drone of machinery and the occasional car passing on the highway. I fell asleep slowly, every muscle finally relaxing, and didn't wake again until the morning sun had begun to spill across the room. When I thought back to it later, it didn't make sense in a rational way. There was nothing supernatural, no intruder caught on camera, no damage to the room aside from the warped floorboards. And yet, the memory of that hoarse whisper, the weight of the unseen presence, stayed with me, a reminder that some places, even mundane motels off a highway in Jackson, carry their own histories and secrets. Whatever had been in that room, it was gone now, and I made sure never to stay at that place again. It was the quietest decision, the simplest form of self-preservation: leave and never look back. I had driven into town late in the afternoon, the sun already low over the highway, casting long shadows across Franklin Boulevard. I was visiting a friend at the university, and since my plans didn't include staying over in the city, I hadn't booked anything in advance. By the time I passed the campus and saw the small, rundown motel tucked behind a strip of fast food joints and an old gas station, I realized I didn't have much choice. The building looked tired, paint peeling off the stucco walls, a flickering neon sign buzzing intermittently. Parking was uneven, the asphalt cracked in several places, but there were a few open spots. I pulled my car into one of them and took a moment to stare at the facade, feeling the tension of driving through unfamiliar streets start to settle into my shoulders. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with stale air. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man with thinning hair glanced up, barely hiding his fatigue. I checked in quickly, only looking at the room number and the key in my hand before I headed out to the stairs that led to the second floor. The hallways were narrow and dimly lit, the carpeting worn down in the middle where countless shoes had tread over it. My room, 207, was at the far end. The door closed with a hollow click, and for a moment, everything outside felt distant. Inside, the room was just as tired as the exterior suggested. The bedspread had a dated floral pattern, the kind you saw in old motels that hadn't been renovated in decades. The furniture was light wood veneer, scuffed along the edges. There was a small desk, a chair, a dresser with a low TV on top, and a nightstand beside the bed. I dropped my bag and started unpacking, trying to ignore the faint odor of mildew that lingered beneath the bleach scent in the air. When I opened the top drawer of the nightstand, I froze. Inside was a single Polaroid. I pulled it out carefully, heart starting to beat a little faster. The photo showed someone asleep on the very bed I had just made. The bedspread was the same, the lamp on the nightstand cast the same glow, and the angle of the shot was unmistakably from the corner near the TV. On the bottom of the Polaroid, written in messy, uneven handwriting, was a single word: beautiful. I felt a chill move down my spine and almost dropped the photo. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Someone had clearly been in this room recently, had taken this picture while I was meant to be alone, and left it there. I gathered my courage and went down to the lobby to speak to the manager. He seemed genuinely confused, almost irritated. He insisted that the drawers were checked after every guest, and that no one had stayed in that room for at least 2 days. His voice carried the practiced calm of someone who dealt with anxious guests regularly, but it didn't soothe me. I thanked him and returned to my room, the Polaroid clutched in my hand, unsure of what to do next. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking slowly, every small sound outside making me jump. The hum of the air conditioner, the occasional car door slamming in the lot, the faint murmur of voices drifting up from the street, all of it felt louder than normal, like my senses were suddenly too sharp. As evening fell, I double-checked the locks on the door and slid the deadbolt in place. I closed the curtains completely, pinning the edges together so no sliver of light could escape or enter. I even pushed the TV stand in front of the door, a small, ridiculous barrier that made me feel marginally safer. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that maybe the Polaroid was just some prank left by a careless staff member. But the feeling of being watched, the knowledge that someone had been in the room without my permission, gnawed at me. I stayed up reading for a while, my eyes flicking toward the nightstand constantly. When midnight came, I turned off the lamp and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent light from the hallway, and I tried to focus on breathing slowly, steadying my racing thoughts. I drifted in and out of sleep, uneasy and tense. Around 4 a.m., I woke suddenly to the sound of my doorknob rattling. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the metallic click and subtle movement were too precise. Someone was testing the knob. I froze, my body tense, my heart hammering. I stayed absolutely still, keeping my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. The knob wiggled again, slowly, deliberately. Whoever it was seemed to be checking if the door was locked. Then the movement stopped. I didn't breathe until I heard the faint scuff of footsteps moving away, down the hall. I lay there for a long time after, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to move. When dawn came, I slowly got up, eyes scanning every shadow in the room. My stomach churned with the memory of the previous night. I went to the nightstand and opened the drawer again, expecting to see the same Polaroid. But it was gone. In its place was another one. I almost dropped it, unable to believe my eyes. The new photo was taken from the same corner near the TV, the same angle as before. But this time, it was me asleep in the bed. I stood there for a moment, staring at the image, heart pounding. Every detail was the same. My blankets half tossed, the lamp still glowing softly, my head turned to the side. The realization sank in slowly, and then fully. Someone had been in the room while I slept. Someone had been watching me, photographing me, and then placing the photo back in the drawer to be found in the morning. I didn't touch the photo again. I packed my things as quickly and quietly as I could, every movement deliberate and controlled, hoping I wouldn't attract attention. I left the key on the counter at the front desk, avoiding eye contact with the manager. Outside, the morning air felt sharp and clear, the sun washing the street in gold, but I didn't linger. I got into my car and drove away without looking back. The image of that Polaroid burned into my mind. I never stayed at that motel again, and I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. For a long time after, I double-checked every door lock when I stayed anywhere, sometimes even carrying small items to wedge in front of the door. It was an ordinary motel, nothing more than faded paint, peeling wallpaper, and tired furniture, but it had been invaded in a way I couldn't explain, and the memory of those photos stayed with me. I still see them in my mind from time to time. The corner by the TV, the angle, the single word scrawled across the bottom. Everything about it was banal, everyday, but the violation of privacy made it terrifying, and I knew I would never forget that room on Franklin Boulevard. Even now, I can picture the sequence exactly. Pulling the drawer open, seeing the Polaroid of me asleep, the lamp's glow, the familiar floral pattern of the bedspread. The intruder left no trace beyond the photos, no fingerprints, no evidence. They didn't break in, they didn't shout, they didn't leave a mark. And maybe that's what made it worse, the subtlety of it, the quiet intimacy of the intrusion. I never solved what happened, and I think that's the point. Some things don't need explanation to be deeply unsettling. I drive past that part of town occasionally, and every time I see the flickering neon sign from the highway, I remember the room. I remember how it felt to be watched, how the small, ordinary details of a motel room became evidence of something deeply personal and wrong. I never took another Polaroid in that room. I never needed to. The memory of the one taken, while I slept, is vivid enough to last a lifetime. The motel still stands, quiet and nondescript from the street, just another tired building on Franklin Boulevard. But for me, it will always be the place where my sense of safety was stripped away in the quietest, most ordinary way possible. I know now that sometimes the scariest things aren't loud or visible. Sometimes they happen in the spaces you think are private, in the small, everyday corners of a room you assume is yours, and the only proof is a single, silent photo. And that's all it ever takes to make a place feel like a trap. I pulled off Blue Lakes Boulevard later than I meant to, the snowstorm slowing every mile of the drive back from Sun Valley. By the time I reached the cluster of motels along the strip, my shoulders were tight from gripping the wheel and my eyes were burning. I didn't care about anything except heat, a bed, and getting the damp cold out of my clothes. The motel I chose looked like the kind of place truckers used when every other room in town was full. Yellowed sign, patchy parking lot, a staircase that had pieces of ice chipped away in irregular shapes. The man at the front desk barely looked up before sliding a key card across the counter, scribbling 212 on a paper sleeve. I didn't bother asking about breakfast or checkout time. I just wanted to get upstairs. The second floor walkway felt crooked under my boots, like it sloped the slightest bit toward the parking lot. Wind was blowing sideways, clattering the metal railing. Room 212 was toward the back, 2 doors from where the walkway dead-ended at a utility closet. A dim orange bulb hummed above the door like it was dying. Inside the room, the heat worked surprisingly well. It smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaning solution, but it was warm, and that was enough. I dropped my bag by the bed and set my boots near the heater to dry. My plan was simple: shower, brush my teeth, sleep until daylight. Nothing complicated. The water took forever to warm up, rattling in the pipes like someone was dragging metal hangers through the walls. The shower curtain smelled faintly like mildew, but the hot water felt good. By the time I stepped out, the mirror was fogged over, and my skin felt warm for the first time all day. I wrapped a towel around my waist and started brushing my teeth, leaning one hand on the counter to steady myself. That was when I heard it. A sharp, high scream ripped through the bathroom vent. Not the vague, muffled kind of sound a pipe sometimes makes. Not a TV. It was clearly a woman, and it came from the vent right above the toilet, raw, panicked, frantic in a way that hit me straight in the chest. I froze mid-brush, toothpaste foaming in my mouth. Another voice followed, deeper, angrier. It didn't carry as clearly, but it had that hard, clipped tone of someone yelling from close range. I stood there motionless, listening. The woman screeched again, the pitch rising like she was being shoved or pulled. The vent rattled slightly from the vibration. Then everything went silent in an instant, like someone cut a wire. My heart hammered hard enough that I could feel it in my neck. I stepped out of the bathroom, grabbed my phone from the bed, and called the front desk. My voice sounded shaky to me, even though I tried to keep it steady. The man on the line didn't seem concerned. He said the vents carried sound strangely in that building, and that I was probably hearing a TV or something bouncing from the other wing. It was the kind of explanation that felt rehearsed. He was already ending the call before I could say anything else. I tried going back to brushing my teeth, but I couldn't make myself step fully into the bathroom. I stood in the doorway instead, glancing at the vent like it was going to open up. For a couple minutes, nothing happened. Only the buzz of the heater and the soft drone of traffic far off on the boulevard. Then it started again. This time it wasn't one scream. It was a burst of them, sharp and uneven, like someone was trying to get free. Between the bursts, I heard thuds, something hitting a wall or floor. I let the toothbrush drop into the sink and backed away. My whole body felt like it was trying to recoil from the sound. The woman let out one last scream, longer and more desperate than the others, and then it stopped completely. No yelling. No thuds. Just a hard, ringing quiet that made the room feel colder. That was when I called 911. Explaining it out loud made it sound unreal, but the dispatcher took it seriously and said officers were nearby. I paced between the bed and door, wiping my wet hair with the towel without even realizing I was doing it. I kept glancing at the bathroom door, expecting the noise to start again, but there was nothing. The red and blue lights flashed through the curtains around 1:10 a.m. When I opened the door, 2 officers were already heading up the walkway. Snow blew in behind them, dusting the carpet outside my room. They asked me to stay put while they checked the rooms that shared the same vent lines. I listened to their footsteps fading down the walkway, then reappearing, then fading again as they went down the staircase to the first floor. Minutes passed slowly, too slowly. Every sound I heard, a heater clicking, a car idling far away, felt magnified by how tense everything was. When the officers came back, their boots tracked melted snow onto the doorway. They said the rooms beneath mine, beside mine, and 2 doors down were all empty. Completely empty. Lights off, heaters off, beds untouched. They double-checked with the motel's records before coming back to tell me. One of the officers looked puzzled. The other looked annoyed, like he already thought the night was a waste of time. They said the motel staff had informed them that section of rooms had been closed since last fall due to a black mold issue. No guests. No one assigned there. No maintenance being done at night. I asked if the vents could carry sound from farther away. The officers said maybe, but it would be unusual for it to sound that close and that sharp. They told me to call again if anything else happened, then left. The sound of their cruiser pulling away left the night feeling strangely hollow. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the warmth of the room settle back around me. Part of me wanted to leave right then, but the snow was still coming down hard, and I was exhausted. I told myself it had to be some kind of echo, or maybe someone outside yelling that the wind pushed through the vent. I didn't really believe it, but I needed a reason to stay. When I stepped back into the bathroom to clean up the mess I'd made earlier, I noticed something new. A slow, steady tapping noise on tile. At first I thought it was from the sink, but the sound was coming from above. I looked toward the vent. Cold droplets of water were forming along the metal slats, collecting until they were heavy enough to fall. One drop at a time, they hit the linoleum and spread into small clear circles. The metal around the vent looked darker, like the moisture had been there for a while, but had finally reached the point of dripping. I could feel a faint cool draft coming out of it. I didn't go near it. I didn't touch it. I grabbed my things, threw them into my bag, and put on my still damp boots without bothering to lace them properly. I checked out without speaking to the man at the desk. He barely looked up, and I didn't wait for any questions. I drove out of the lot with my hands tight on the wheel. Later, when I thought about it with a clearer head, the explanation came together in a way that made awful sense. Those rooms had been closed for months because of mold. Mold thrives in moisture. Moisture comes from leaks. Leaks spread through vents, walls, ceilings. Anywhere water can find a path. If a pipe burst or a section of ceiling collapsed somewhere in those empty rooms, it could have let water and sound move unpredictably through the ventilation line. A flooded space echoes differently. Sounds bounce sharply. A single groan of a pipe or the shift of wet drywall can mimic something human when you're tired, alone, and already on edge. That dripping vent in my bathroom was the first sign that moisture had finally reached my side of the system. Whatever I heard that night, it came from water and empty space, nothing more. No people, no violence, just a decaying, sealed-off part of the motel settling under the weight of cold, pressure, and time. I still don't brush my teeth near vents in cheap motels anymore. I don't think I ever will. I left Las Cruces later than I should have, sometime after 9, telling myself I'd power through the drive to Phoenix like I usually did. The interstate felt long and hollow that night, nothing but dark stretches of asphalt broken by the same clusters of truck lights and the occasional car drifting past. By midnight, I was already fighting to keep my eyes open. The caffeine from the gas station coffee I'd picked up near Deming had worn off fast, leaving a jittery emptiness instead of any real alertness. My shoulders ached from gripping the wheel, and the dull hum of the tires began to blend with the wind until I couldn't tell which was which anymore. By the time I crossed the New Mexico-Arizona border, my vision had that slight blur it gets just before exhaustion wins, and I knew I couldn't push it any farther. Wilcox showed up like a faint patch of light in the dark, and I took the exit without thinking twice. I remembered passing through it years earlier, but it looked smaller than I recalled. The street lights along the main road flickered in a slow, tired rhythm, like they were struggling to stay lit. A few motels sat scattered along the road, most of them the kind with peeling signs and parking lots that hadn't been repainted in decades. I pulled into one called something generic, maybe Desert Inn or Western something. I don't remember exactly, just that the neon sign buzzed louder than the heater in my car. The place looked worn down but not abandoned. Faded blue doors lined up in a long row, each one slightly different from the next, some scratched, some dented, a few missing bits of weather stripping around the edges. A vending machine sat beside the office window with its display off, empty slots visible through the glass. It was 1:15 a.m. by the time I parked in front of room 17. The air was cool but dry enough to sting my eyes when I stepped out. The gravel in the parking lot was uneven, giving a slight crunch with every step as I carried my duffel bag toward the door. The room number was painted crookedly on a metal plate, half flaked away, barely hanging on. I noticed right away that the doorframe looked a little warped, the wood pulled outward near the bottom corner, almost like someone had forced it once and it never fully recovered. I pushed the thought aside. Old motels always had something wrong with them. Inside, the room smelled faintly like old carpet and bleach. The dim amber bulb in the ceiling fan gave everything a tired, yellowed look. There was a small table, a chair that wobbled when I touched it, and a bedspread with some geometric pattern faded from years of washing. The bathroom was cramped, with cracked tiles that had been painted over so many times the texture felt uneven under my feet. Still, it was quiet, and I was too tired to care about anything except lying down for a few hours. Before doing that, though, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I locked the door, latched the deadbolt, and then dragged my duffel bag in front of the lower half of the door. The warped frame didn't give me much confidence, and the door felt lighter than it should have when I closed it. It wasn't paranoia exactly, just a gut instinct from years of traveling late at night. The kind of feeling that shows up when you're running on fumes, and everything feels slightly off. I took a short shower, letting the water wash off the road dust. The mirror fogged instantly, and I could barely see my reflection through the haze. My hands felt shaky as I dried off, not from fear but from exhaustion. When I finally lay down on the bed, the sheets were cool, slightly rough, but enough to make me relax into them. The air conditioner rattled every few minutes, a faint metallic tapping that blended with the hum from outside. I closed my eyes, slipping into that half-dreaming state where thoughts start to drift and time becomes loose. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before it happened. I was lying on my side, nearly asleep, when I heard it, a soft, deliberate click. Not like the random settling of a building or the creak of plumbing. It was clean, precise, the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. My eyes snapped open instantly. The room stayed dark except for the faint glow from the parking lot seeping through the curtains. I didn't move at first. I just listened. For a moment, nothing happened, and I wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then the doorknob turned slowly, the metal shifting in tiny increments like someone was testing how quietly they could move it. The sound froze me completely. I stared at the shadowed outline of the door, barely visible in the dim light. The knob turned again, just slightly, then stopped. My duffel bag sat right in front of the door, and I watched to see if it would move. For a second, nothing did. Then the door pushed inward a few millimeters, just enough to make the bag nudge forward. A slow, steady pressure from the other side. Someone was trying to open it, not forcing it violently but easing it, almost like they expected it to open as easily as any other door with a working key. My throat tightened, and I felt a cold rush of adrenaline push away every trace of sleepiness. I didn't shout or move toward the door. I just let out a low sound, instinctive, closer to a warning than anything else. The pressure stopped immediately. The doorknob stayed frozen in place. For several long seconds, the room felt suspended, like even the air wasn't moving. Then the handle eased back to its original position with a faint metallic click. No footsteps, no voices, no retreating shadow under the door. Just the silence filling in after something wrong had almost happened. I didn't move the bag. I didn't turn on the light. I sat up in bed, back against the wall, and listened to every sound. The distant hum of a truck passing on the highway, the buzz of the flickering light outside, the occasional rattle of the air conditioner. Nothing else touched the door. No one tried again. But I couldn't shake the knowledge that someone had stood on the other side with a key to my room. I stayed awake until dawn. When the sky finally turned pale and the sun hit the thin curtains, I packed my things immediately. The room looked the same in the daylight, but the calm of morning didn't erase the memory of the doorknob turning in the dark. When I stepped outside, the breeze felt too cool against my skin, and the parking lot seemed even emptier than the night before. Only 2 other cars were parked nearby, both dusty and older. I walked to the front office, not sure what I expected, maybe concern, maybe surprise, but the manager barely looked up when I explained what happened. His expression stayed blank the entire time, and he shrugged in a way that made it clear he didn't care one way or another. He insisted no one else had keys. He repeated that it must have been my imagination, something influenced by driving too long in the desert. He didn't check anything. He didn't ask questions. He just waited for me to finish talking, so he could return to whatever he was doing. I left without arguing. There was no point. When I walked back to room 17 to grab the last of my things, the sunlight caught the latch on the inside of the door, and I finally saw it clearly. The metal was bent outward, just slightly, the angle wrong in a way I hadn't noticed in the dark. It looked like someone had slipped something thin into the gap and tried to work it around the latch. My stomach tightened again. The warped frame, the bent latch, the key turning in the dead of night. It all fit together too neatly to ignore. I drove straight home to Phoenix, replaying the moment over and over in my head. The long desert road looked flatter than usual, and every passing mile marker felt like distance I desperately needed between myself and that room. When I finally got home and carried my duffel bag into the living room, I unpacked it slowly, still unsettled by everything that had happened. It wasn't until I reached the side pocket that I realized something was missing. My pocket knife, the one I kept clipped inside for years, was gone. The pocket was unzipped. I remembered placing the bag in front of the door, thinking it would help block anyone from entering. I hadn't thought about the fact that the zipper faced outward. I never stopped at a roadside motel after that. I was driving east on I-70 when my car started to overheat somewhere outside Salina. The gauge crept past red, steam rose from under the hood, and I realized I wasn't going to make it to the next exit without the engine seizing. I coasted onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and watched the steam curl into the cold evening air. It was early October, and the wind carried a chill, but the sun hadn't completely set. The highway was mostly empty, save for a few trucks that hummed past, oblivious. My phone was low on battery, and I didn't have roadside assistance, so I did the only thing I could think of. I looked up the nearest motel on the GPS. There was one a few miles ahead, a small place just off the interstate with a neon sign that buzzed faintly. Motel rooms were a gamble, but I didn't have a choice. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty, the asphalt cracked, the paint on the spaces long faded. The building itself had a cheap late 70s look, beige siding, a flat roof, faded brick accents, and a flickering light above the office door. The desk inside was cluttered with receipts, a small stack of maps, and a ringing phone no one answered. The clerk was a thin man in a rumpled shirt, probably in his 60s, who looked up at me from behind the plexiglass like he hadn't seen a guest in hours. When I asked for a room, he hesitated, and I got the sense he wasn't used to people showing up at this hour. I explained the situation, that I was stuck and needed one night, and he sighed. He went to a drawer, shuffled some keys around, and pulled one out, labeled 25. His hand lingered over it, like he was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't, so he slid it across the counter without a word. The directions he gave me were oddly convoluted. He said the room wasn't on the main walkway, that I'd need to take the outside staircase on the far side of the lot, then follow a narrow metal hallway that ran along the back of the building, past what looked like storage rooms and maintenance areas. The key was heavy, old, and cold in my hand. I walked to the staircase, the steps creaking under my weight, the chain link railing rattling slightly in the wind. The hallway was dimly lit, fluorescent bulbs humming overhead, and smelled faintly of rust, dust, and something sour that I couldn't place. I half expected to see a mop bucket or a janitor's cart, but it was mostly empty, the walls lined with peeling gray paint and exposed conduits. Room 25 was at the far end. When I unlocked the door, the air hit me first. It was humid, thick in a way that made my skin crawl. It smelled faintly of mildew, like the air had been trapped for years and only circulated poorly. The window had a heavy curtain, yellowed at the edges, and the room felt dim despite the small overhead light. The bed was made with an old quilt, heavy and slightly rough, rather than the motel's usual patterned blanket that I'd seen in more modern rooms. The furniture was sparse, a chipped nightstand, a small dresser with a warped top, and a cheap desk pushed against the wall. The carpet was frayed near the door, sticky in places where dirt and grime had embedded over time. I set my bags down, turned on the faucet to check the water, and noticed the bathroom smelled damp, a faint coppery scent in the sink. Everything felt off, though nothing was obviously broken or dangerous. It was just a room that had been left to itself for a long time, somewhere between neglect and intentional isolation. I tried to settle in, but the room made it difficult. The air didn't move, even with the window cracked slightly. The hum of the old HVAC unit was uneven, sometimes low and steady, other times a sharp, metallic whine that echoed off the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here recently, or maybe long ago, and had left something behind that lingered in the dust and the air. The quilt smelled faintly of smoke, though there were no burn marks, just a stale odor that pressed against my nose when I leaned over it. I unpacked a few things, tried to wash my hands, and finally sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress sag beneath me. It wasn't comfortable, not at all, but it was a place to rest after the long drive. I told myself I was imagining the weirdness. Around 11, I realized I needed more towels. The single one left on the rack was thin and worn. I grabbed the key, made my way back down the hall, and went to the front desk. The night clerk was a different person, younger, with a clean polo shirt and a polite, neutral expression. I gave him my room number. "Room 25, he said, frowning. His voice had that quiet edge of confusion, like he was double-checking what I said. "Yes," I said. He tapped at the computer, then pulled out the wall map, tracing his finger along the rows of doors. Then he opened a drawer of keys, shuffled them around carefully. Finally, he looked at me incredulous. "Sir, we don't have a room 25. There are only 24 rooms. Has been that way for decades." I held up the key. He took it, turning it over in his hand, shaking his head. He looked at me like I was joking, but I wasn't. I tried explaining the staircase, the metal hallway, but he seemed genuinely baffled. He muttered something about renovations or closed-off rooms, then returned to his desk. I left, feeling a growing knot in my chest. When I walked back, the hallway felt wrong. The angles didn't match my memory from before, or maybe the dim lighting was playing tricks. It seemed longer, narrower, almost impossibly so. When I reached the end, the door with 25 on it was there, but the numbers looked cheap, like someone had glued them on that afternoon. The key wouldn't fit. I tried again, jiggled it, then stepped back, checked the handle, and realized the lock had changed, or the door itself had changed. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I backed away slowly, realizing I had no choice but to sleep in my car. The night was cold, and I stayed in the driver's seat with the engine running occasionally for heat. I kept checking the hallway from the parking lot, expecting to see the door, but in the morning it was gone. Where room 25 had been was now an unmarked supply closet, chained shut with a thick padlock. The outside staircase led to the same hallway I had walked before, but everything looked normal now. 24 doors, the peeling gray paint, the fluorescent hum, but number 25. It was like it had never existed, or had been quietly removed while I slept in the car. I left as soon as I could. The motel looked ordinary in the daylight, the cracked asphalt, the faded beige siding, the flickering neon sign. The clerk was gone, the office locked. There was no note, no explanation, nothing. I drove out of the lot slowly, keeping my eyes on the building, and it sat there quietly, empty, ordinary, perfectly mundane. The memory of that room, the smell, the stale air, the too long hallway, stuck with me. I told myself it was a mistake, a closed-off storage area I had mistaken for a room. But the key in my pocket was real, heavy, and cold, and it didn't fit anywhere else in the motel. I never stayed in a place like that again, and whenever I think about Selena, I picture that metal hallway, the sticky carpet, the quilt that smelled of smoke, and the room that should not have been there at all.